Hereditary, a Petersonian review. This is going to be a spoiler-free review. I recently rented this movie and I watched it twice. It's actually a really good movie. There's a lot to cover here. I'm not going to do a full review in the Petersonian fashion, just a partial review. And for anybody who's clicking on this who's not familiar with Jordan Peterson, he's a psychologist. So when I say Petersonian, I just mean I want to focus on some of the things you're not going to hear about in other reviews, namely things having to do with the psychology of what's happening in the movie, or perhaps the philosophy of it. So, here's just another picture of one of the actresses in the film, and the little mouse head there. So there's three things I want to cover in this short review. The story about the story, the power of the spoken word and / the written word, but more importantly the spoken word, and a critique that I read in some other review about men falling into power while women are overlooked. And so I read a lot of reviews of this movie, and I'm trying to focus on things that you're not going to hear in other reviews. So let's get right to it. There's basically two stories going on in this film, and I think this is one of the main points of the film, is to critique how we as a society handle problems. And so one way is the biological or materialist way of handling a problem. And so one of the characters, the father of the family, is a doctor. And so he sort of represents the way of handling affairs in a materialist framework. And this is the way our society tends to handle things. So we go to doctors, we use medicine, and we treat things as, well, let's say psychological things, as mental illness. So you'll hear the mental illness thing come up a lot when there's like a school shooting or some kind of tragedy, and people will say it's stigmatized, or let's destigmatize mental illness and so forth. And people will talk about the kind of medicines people are taking for mental illness, and they'll question whether they should be on so many meds and so forth. So this all fits into the materialist worldview. The other story going on in this story is one of sort of a religious framework. And this, I think, has to do with, it's represented by the mother in the family, the mother and the grandmother. And this is where perhaps you're going to hear all about how heredity plays a role in the movie from all the other reviewers. So I'm not going to even touch that really, but I'm trying to focus just on the stuff you're not going to hear. So the mother is sort of representative of the religious story and the religious way or spiritual way of handling specifically tragedy. And so then you're going to get into a seance, and you're going to get into the story in the terms of good versus evil. And certainly evil. You may not see as much good, but there's definitely evil. And I think what the film is trying to tell us is that not everything is going to be mental illness or biological or fit within a materialist framework. Sometimes things and people are actually just evil. And sometimes you need to use a sort of religious way of looking at the world in order to understand it, to cope with it, and to overcome it. If you're not able to do that, then I think the film explores how that goes. And if you are familiar with Jordan Peterson, you'll understand that when he's talking about his practice, his private practice that he used to have as a psychologist, treating people, he had to invoke religious language in order to help heal people. There was no other way to look at the world when someone is broken besides that of good and evil. And I thought this movie, even though it's like a horror mystery thriller, this was a really interesting way to present this story between the materialist and the religious frame, and the different the two ways of handling tragedy in the world, and not just tragedy, but just overcoming a problem in the world. Then there's the part about the spoken word. The movie opens sort of, to me, very powerfully with a eulogy, and there's a lot of information in this eulogy, and it was a really brilliant way of casting a character that never really shows up in the movie. It's a dead grandmother figure, or a mother figure to the mother of the family. And so it opens with a eulogy. These are spoken words that we say to help heal ourselves and others in our presence during a time of mourning. And so that's the power of the spoken word there. And then this woman goes to a talk therapy group to help her in the grieving process. Again, speaking as a way of healing, using the spoken word to heal in a group setting. And then we see, now that's sort of like these sort of fit into the materialist secular worldview. A eulogy is something even secular people do, and talk therapy certainly secular people do. But then there's also this aspect of a seance, and now the spoken word sort of takes on a magical aspect. Similarly, there's the written word, so you'll see words appearing on walls, and you'll see words written in books, specifically what seem to be spell books. So those also kind of played a key role in the movie, and sort of represented the religious aspect of the world. And so the last thing I want to touch upon is the social critique that I read in a review. And like I said, it was about how women were overlooked in the movie for potential power, and that power kind of just fell into the lap of a man, and he was sort of undeserving and what have you. And I'm trying to say this in a very non-spoiler way, and I think I've done that. But as I think what Jordan Peterson might say about this is that this is a very ideological way of looking at it, and an ideology tends to emphasize only one side of the picture, and everything sort of has two sides, and to balance this, I think you need to see the other side of it, and I think the movie does show the other side, but this reviewer was not willing to talk about the other side. So again, I'm trying to say things without being spoilery, but I think what I say here is pretty generic and touches on a whole host of mythology and stories otherwise known to us. So classically, women derive their power from beauty and their bodies, which also goes along with their youth. And so, and again, I'm speaking about stories and how women are portrayed in stories and mythology. I'm not saying what actually is. So in mythology, as women lose their youth, they lose that power over men that they had with their bodies and their beauty. So then women have to learn to gain power over men with other means, and that would primarily be by means of speech. And we know that women are more gifted, generally speaking, verbally than men are, so it would be natural that they would then assume this advantage and use that power over men whenever they could, especially since they're disadvantaged in other ways. So then you have women cast as witches, and these witches are casting spells using their speech, using words, usually the spoken word, sometimes it's the written word. And these are ways to manipulate men when they can no longer do so with their bodies. And I think Jordan Peterson even, he's given like a speech about this before. He's mentioned it in some of his talkings. So it's not something you're totally unfamiliar with. So the women in this family in the movie were all shown to be very creative, and so they and women in general are sort of representations of the unconscious, so that that's the area of creativity for the mind. Typically, if you're talking about a Jungian perspective, and the one man of the family, the husband, the doctor, he was, master of the biological. So he was the representation of consciousness. And so through the movie, if you want to look at it through a Jungian lens, there is this battle between conscious and unconscious, and casting the movie that way and seeing it in that light, in sort of a Jungian light, and materialist versus a religion framework, or a conscious versus unconscious framework. It was really interesting to watch the movie. Like I said, I watched it twice, and I don't watch low quality films. I don't waste my time on that. I only watch high quality films, and this was definitely a high quality film, and it's worth your time. And since Halloween is coming up, and also more importantly, October 31st was when Luther, I think, posted his 95 Theses. I'm going to do another movie review like this, maybe of Cabin in the Woods. That's a really good movie. If you haven't seen it, I'm going to do a small review like this, probably next week, of Cabin in the Woods. So if you enjoy these little, highlights of psychological things in film, give this video a like and subscribe. Thank you.